Although Amos is the third in the chronology of the minor prophets, this is thought to be the oldest of the prophetic writings in the Bible. The words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the day of King Uzziah of Judah, and in the days of King Jeroboam, son of Joash of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. And he said, "The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds wither, and the top of Carmel dries up. Seek good and not evil, that you may live, and so that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be with you, just as you have said. Hate evil and love good, and establish justice in the gate. It may be that the Lord, the God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." And from Mark chapter 12. As he taught, Jesus said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplace, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. And he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." May God add a blessing to the reading of these holy words. I have to begin with a little preacher angst today. One of the hardest things for me about sermon writing is actually the title. In an ideal world, the title would come last, but in the church, bulletins happen before sermons do, so sometimes the titles are less than ideal, and that just is the case today. I have no idea whether any of you even pay attention to what the title of a sermon is, but if you did this morning, I apologize because I'm changing it to offerings. Okay? There. It is the offerings of the people to God that are the subject of both texts this morning, something that I didn't really pay any attention to until late in the week. In our Old Testament offering, the prophet Amos speaks on God's behalf and rejects the animals, dead and living, and the grains presented as sacrifices to Yahweh or to the priests as payment for their services. God, through Amos, also condemns the worship offerings of the people, their holy celebrations, liturgy, and music, and not because God liked organs better than drums and guitars. Because of the nation's transgressions, primarily against the poor, God found no pleasure, no joy, no integrity in the people's worship. And he basically says to them, I don't want your songs. I don't want your prayers. I don't want your sacrifices. Go home. You have sunk so low in every way that your worship has become as sick and corrupt as everything else about your life together. And it makes me sick too. Amos prophesied in the northern kingdom of Israel around 750 BCE, a time of affluence for Israel. But God could see that despite their outward fiscal health, the nation was not well. And that unwellness, that dis-ease, manifested itself in the failure to put the needs of the neediest first. Among other infractions we learn throughout Amos, God accuses Israel of selling people into slavery who couldn't pay their debts, unfairly taxing the poor, using their status to enjoy greater rewards than their less fortunate neighbors, and when that wasn't successful, bribing officials to make sure that the system at least worked for them. The Israelites identified themselves as God's chosen ones. That much of their history they claimed. But they had come to believe that their prosperity was a direct result of their specialness. When they had what they had lost sight of was their calling as the people of God to keep the covenant that God demanded, faithfulness to God and justice for the whole people of God. So while they went through the motions of worship, including an offering, God found their rituals meaningless and empty because the way they lived in community revealed their rejection of the values and the priorities that God had established for them. In the passage from Mark's Gospel, more commonly known as the widow's mite, the two coins that the widow drops in the offering plate at the temple, they're what actually catch Jesus' attention in the story. We know virtually nothing about her from the story except that she's poor. With no Social Security, no 401k plan, no safety net for women whose husbands died. Poverty was a predictable outcome for her. The Hebrew root for widow, alam, means one unable to speak. A woman without a husband in a culture that gave widows no legal status truly had no voice. And in Greek, widow means forsaken, left without. You get the picture of her dire and desperate circumstance. Jesus did too. It's important to know that this is the last scene in Jesus' public ministry. Palm Sunday has already happened. He rode into Jerusalem in triumph. He predicted the destruction of the temple, in which he now sits and watches. The opposition of the religious leaders to his ministry and to him is gaining momentum, and he will be arrested soon. During the coming days, he will spend his time with his disciples and face increasing challenges by the authorities. Before noticing the widow, Jesus observes them, the authorities, at the temple treasury, especially the scribes, the leaders who are the authorities on all things financial and legal, including the interpretation of religious texts. Jesus criticizes their pretentious practices of strolling around in expensive robes, seeking public acclaim, taking the best seats in synagogues and local restaurants, and presenting long, drawn-out, listen-to-me prayers. Their hypocrisy rankles. The law, about which they are supposed to be experts, actually treats widows sympathetically, but Mark states that the scribes devour widows' houses, suggesting some kind of exploitive practices involving women's property, which leaves them with nothing. The finery of the scribes can't disguise their exploitation, their cheating these women, who in a male-dominated culture are just generally defenseless and vulnerable. For Jesus, the scribes exemplify the corruption of the temple system itself on a day when he watches a widow give everything she has to live on. Those 2 coins were her life, like her whole life. No wonder Jesus notices and is moved by her generosity. But not because he thinks every person should empty his or her wallet or bank accounts whenever the offering plate is passed. Nowhere in this story does Jesus glamorize or celebrate the woman's sacrifice. He notices, and he laments the brokenness in religious and social systems that leave her with no options for faithfulness but giving her literal last cent. Surely Jesus does not want this woman to give everything, because then she will have nothing, and she will suffer, and she will die in short order. For the sake of a broken system and broken people and corruption and abuse and hypocrisy and empty rituals and meaningless worship. I think maybe in her Jesus sees a kindred spirit, because in just days from this moment, he too will give his life, literally, all he has, for the sake of a broken system and broken people and corruption and abuse and hypocrisy and empty rituals and meaningless worship. So this isn't a story about money, really. It's not even about stewardship. It is, however, about discipleship, which encompasses how we live and give, how we relate to God and one another, how we think about our wealth and our poverty, our priorities and express our faithfulness, how we trust in God's abundance and share it. Within the last week, you should have received an envelope in the mail that looks just like this, except it has your name on it and not mine. And in it, you found a letter from the gatherers and me, as well as some frequently asked questions and answers about stewardship in the church, and a pledge card. And it is an invitation for you to commit anew or again to a financial pledge to this church for next year. And then you are asked to bring it next week as we celebrate Thanks and Praise Sunday. So here's some food for thought as you ponder your envelope and pray about how you might respond this year. First, don't give your last 2 cents to the church. I mean that seriously. If that is all you have, I think God wants you to keep it and eat. And when you will get to a time in your life when you are thinking beyond mere survival, then you reassess. Most of us are not at that place. The church's primary mission, I believe, its most important task, is to make disciples for Jesus. And we do that through our worship and education and community and opportunities to share the gifts that we have received, whether that's singing in the choir, playing the organ or piano, or teaching Sunday school, or serving as a Stephen minister, or putting together Christmas baskets as a deacon, or running the sound and video system, or answering the phones, or leading as an elder, or delivering Meals on Wheels, or any number of other tasks you might be called to do. The spiritual growth and maturity and health of every person here ought to be the priority of every session, always, because the church is in the business of changing lives, right? As we grow and mature in the name of Christ, our lives are changed, and the lives of others are changed because of that. And so by this, the session is encouraging you to grow more into who God has created you to be, as a liver and as a giver. The aim of a stewardship campaign, and it may not always feel like this, but I I believe this is true. It is not to finance the church's annual operating budget. It is to change lives, yours and others. Giving is just a part of our discipleship. It is a part of our spiritual formation. When God breaks in upon a sufficiently prepared people, a new generosity emerges, one that is joyful and spontaneous and free and not racked by a sense of guilt or obligation or grumbling. We aren't ever called to disregard ourselves or our survival. We are called, however, over and over again, to offer ourselves in service to God. As Paul says in his letter to the Romans, we are to present our bodies as a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God. And I would add our minds and our hearts and our worship and our wallets. Thanks be